Alrighty, so our goal in this very first thought primer is to get on the same page regarding some important fundamental concepts and some useful philosophic tools that we're going to be relying on for all of our conversations in this course. And I know you've already been thinking about some of these important fundamental concepts because I asked you about some of them in your thought primer. The very first question I asked you is this: what is a moral action, an immoral action, and a moral judgment? And we might come at this question by thinking about the ways that we judge actions in general. So we look at a business or we look at a sports team and we look at their actions and they say, wow, that was really strategic what they did. Those were strategic actions that they just took. Or we're hanging out with our friends and one of them comes up to us and says, here, hold my beer, watch this. And we look and we think, oh, that was such a dumb thing to do. Okay. Now, why are we describing these actions in these ways as either strategic or dumb? It's because we recognize that these actions are associated with certain features or qualities that leads to these descriptions, these judgments. So we look at this business or we look at this sports team and we think to ourselves, wow, what they did, it really efficiently and effectively advances them toward their goal. That's why I'm calling it a strategic action. It effectively and efficiently advanced them towards their goal. But I look at my friend, on the other hand, who did the dumb thing, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm saying that what you did is dumb because the result of your actions was unnecessary and undesirable outcomes. It was a dumb thing to do. Now, when we talk about actions being moral or immoral, what we're saying is we associate these actions with certain features. And those features are going to have to do with principles and values, okay? Things that we value. If we take an action that effectively promotes or protects something that we value or some principles that we hold dear, we might then say that was a moral action. You actually protected something that I think is of value. On the other hand, if your action is one that compromised or threatened these things that I hold to have high value or to be very important principles, then I'm going to say that was an immoral action. Okay, so moral actions, just broadly speaking, as broadly as possible, are those actions that protect and promote our values, and immoral actions are ones that compromise or threaten those values. Now, we can break these two descriptions down even further, and we could say that some actions are morally permissible. These are things that you can do without threatening our values or our principles, or your value or your principles, okay? It doesn't necessarily mean that the morally permissible action is a moral action. It just means that it's an action that doesn't harm, compromise, or threaten what we value. So if you wanted to pause your video right now and go play your guitar for 5 minutes, fine. You're not doing anything wrong. You're not doing something that's bad. You're not doing anything that's immoral. You're also not doing something that's going to cause us to say like, wow, you're such a good person for going and playing a guitar. Okay, it's sort of a morally neutral action, but it is morally permissible. On the other hand, if you said to yourself, I'm going to pause my video because what I really want to do right now is go try to hurt the feelings of my spouse or my child. And we'd say like, whoa, hold on here. Now you're doing something that's immoral. You're doing something that's morally prohibited. You are not allowed to do that, okay? It makes you into kind of a bad person when you do that, okay? So morally permissible are those actions that we can do without harming our principles and values, and morally prohibited actions are the ones that would compromise or threaten our values or our principles. And then finally, we might have this category of actions that we would describe as morally obligatory. These are not just things that you're allowed to do. These are things that you have to do in order to be the kind of person I think you should be, or you think you should be. So if I'm standing at the edge of a river, just kind of enjoying the day, sipping on my beer, looking at the clouds, and here comes a baby floating by in this knee-deep water, and it's flailing around because it's obviously drowning. And you're standing over there on the other side of the river, and you're looking at me just going, huh, interesting. A floating baby. You'd look at me and you'd yell and you'd say like, hey dude, what's wrong with you? You are obligated to save drowning children when there's no risk to you when doing so. You're morally obligated to do this. And if you don't do this thing, if you don't take this action, I'm going to actually think you're kind of a crummy person. You're a bad character, okay? So morally permissible, morally prohibited, morally obligated. And we can even break down morally obligated into two smaller categories. We can say that there are some positive obligations that we have. In other words, there are some things that we have to actively initiate and do in order to maintain our status as a good ethical person. The floating baby is a good example. Okay, I can't just sit there and watch the baby drown and still think of myself as a morally upright person. I have to take steps. I have to act. Okay, it's a positive obligation that I have, and if I don't fulfill that obligation, and I look to you and I say, "What? I didn't do anything," and you're going to say, like, "Yeah, that's the problem. You needed to do something. You were morally obligated to do something, and you didn't do it." On the other hand, there are negative obligations that we have. There are certain things that you can't do and maintain your status as a moral person, okay? So you can't punch somebody in the face when they insult you, okay? That's a negative obligation that you have. That's something you have to refrain from doing. You can't slash the tires of the person who cut you off in traffic. You have to refrain from doing that no matter how much you want to do that. That's an obligation that you have to not destroy somebody else's property without sufficient justification. All right, so the last the thing I asked you to consider here is what exactly is a moral judgment? And that's what we're going to talk about in the next lecture.